She had spent every Christmas alone, until the night someone from her past knocked on her door. But the man standing there carried a truth powerful enough to break her, or finally heal her. On a quiet Christmas Eve, Laura thought the world had forgotten her, until Destiny returned wearing familiar eyes. Where are you listening from? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. In the small mountain town of Pine Valley, Christmas was more than a date on the calendar, it was a collective ritual, almost sacred. The cobblestone streets were flooded with colorful lights, golden bells hanging from balconies, kids running back and forth in crooked red Santa hats, and the smell of cinnamon French toast and freshly baked bread drifting out of windows like an invitation. Every house, without exception, had some kind of Christmas decoration, a handmade wreath, a string of mismatched twinkle lights, a faded inflatable Santa that still managed to smile. It felt as if the entire town had silently agreed never to let Christmas lose its magic. Every house, except one. At the top of a small hill, a little ways from the town square, stood a modest house with pale walls and an aging clay tile roof. That Christmas Eve, unlike every year before, the front of the house was bare, no lights, no wreath, no red bows. The iron gate stayed shut, heavy and silent. That was where Emma Clark lived. 32 years old, nurse, daughter of Evelyn and older sister of Daniel. Or at least, she had been. Emma sat on the living room floor, legs crossed, facing the same artificial Christmas tree she'd known since she was 15. The lights were weaker now, blinking slowly, throwing soft yellow reflections onto walls covered with old photographs. One of them showed teenage Emma, hugging her mom and her little brother, all three smiling in front of the town church. Another showed the three of them decorating that very same tree, laughing at something that now felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. Beside the couch, a box of ornaments lay open. Half the decorations were still inside, as if Emma had started to put Christmas together and, at some point, just given up. In her hands, she held a small porcelain angel, one wing cracked and carefully glued back on. Her mother had bought it years ago at a craft fair downtown. She used to say that as long as the angel was whole on the inside, the house would be protected. Protected from what, Mom? Emma had asked, laughing. Protected from losing hope, sweetheart, Evelyn had answered. Because losing hope, that's worse than anything. Now, staring at the patched-up angel, Emma wondered if that glue was still holding anything together at all. Inside, she felt irreparably split. 2 years earlier, she had buried her mother after a long, exhausting battle with a quiet illness that had drained the family's strength, and Emma's, both physically and emotionally. 6 months later, her brother Daniel had moved out of state, to the far north, chasing work and trying to escape the suffocating sadness in that house full of memories. Video calls had grown rare. Text messages, more and more spaced out. Slowly, Emma had grown used to a heavy kind of silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the town or the echo of her own footsteps through the rooms. As if that hadn't been enough, 3 months ago the regional hospital where she worked had laid off a big chunk of the staff. Emma, loved by her patients and known for her dedication, had been one of the unlucky ones. Budget cuts, they'd said. Crisis. Cost containment. She understood it rationally. But emotionally, it felt like someone had just ripped away the last support beam holding her life together. That Christmas Eve would be the first time in her entire life that she would spend the night completely alone. No Christmas dinner. No family. No shift at the hospital, where she'd gotten used to spending the holiday taking care of patients, and, in some strange way, feeling less alone, surrounded by other people's stories, dramas, and smiles. Pine Valley sparkled, but inside that house, the light was gone. Emma took a deep breath, trying to shake off the emptiness. She stood up, walked into the kitchen, and put a leftover bit of soup on the stove to heat. That was all there was. The fridge held half a dozen food items, arranged with a kind of sad precision, as if every single one were too precious to waste. She poured the soup into a chipped bowl, sat at the table, and for a brief moment thought about saying a prayer. But no words came. The knot in her throat was too tight. It was 7:42 p.m. when Emma walked back into the living room, carrying the bowl and a mug of tea. She turned on an old radio and found a station playing instrumental Christmas music, a habit she kept more out of muscle memory than desire. The first notes of Silent Night began to play, and for a few seconds she closed her eyes, remembering Christmases from when she was a little girl. Her mother singing off-key. Her father, gone now for many years, but still the source of a few warm memories, making silly jokes with the figures from the nativity scene. Daniel running through the house, pretending to be Santa's helper. All of it felt so distant now that it hurt. And it was right then, when the pain threatened to spill over as tears, that something broke the pattern of the night. A sharp, unexpected sound echoed through the house. Knock. 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 Emma almost dropped the bowl. For a second, she thought she'd imagined it. Who on earth would knock at her door on Christmas Eve, at that hour, at that house that was always so quiet? The sound came again. Knock. 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 This time, more insistent. Her heart sped up. A chill ran down her arms. She set the bowl carefully on the coffee table, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile balance of that night, and walked slowly toward the front door. With every step, old memories stirred, surfacing like fragments from a distant dream. Because, in a way she couldn't explain, that knocking sound at that exact time tugged at a memory of another Christmas, many years ago, another Christmas when someone had also knocked on the door and changed the direction of everything. Emma slowly turned the doorknob. She opened the door. And there, framed by the warm yellow glow of the street lamp and the soft haze of a mild December night, stood a man she hadn't seen in more than 12 years. Michael Reyes. Emma's first love. The boy from down the hill she had once shared secrets with, traded dreams with, and made that naive teenage promise of forever with. The young man who had made her believe, back then, that the world might be bigger than Pine Valley. The same one who had vanished from her life without a word, leaving for Chicago, shattering her heart, and leaving behind a silence she'd thought would never really be filled. But now he was standing there. Older. Worn. Different. Michael looked about 34 now. A few days of stubble on his face, dark circles under his eyes, a beat-up briefcase hanging from his right hand. His dress shirt was wrinkled, the top buttons undone like he'd been walking for hours. His hair was a mess, and there was a feverish, desperate shine in his brown eyes. For a moment, neither of them could speak. Time seemed to fold in on itself, dragging back all those frozen scenes from their teenage years, laughing in the park, talking about leaving town together, the stolen kiss behind the church decorated for Christmas, that promise that he'd be back for the holidays, a promise he never kept. The silence finally broke with Michael's rough voice. "Hey, Emma." The way he said her name carried 12 years' worth of absence, guilt, and longing pressed into 2 short syllables. She needed several seconds before she could answer. "Michael?" Her voice came out small, almost a shocked whisper. What are you doing here?" He drew in a breath, the kind you take when you've practiced a line 100 times but still don't feel ready to say it. "I'm sorry to just show up like this," he began, his voice unsteady. I had nowhere else to go. And in the middle of everything, there was only one place I could think of. Here. You." The words hit Emma like a bolt of lightning. Part of her, still hurt, still carrying the memory of being left behind, wanted to slam the door. Another part, the one that still remembered the sensitive boy who used to sketch colorful houses in the margins of his math notebook, wanted to pull him into a hug and tell him that despite everything, he was still welcome. she did neither. She just stood there, frozen, trying to process. Michael saw the conflict in her face and dropped his gaze, ashamed. "I know I don't deserve this," he muttered. "Not after the way I left. And you have every right to tell me to get lost. But I'm at a point where one more door slammed in my face might be the end of me." There was something in the way he said that, the end of me, that set off an alarm deep inside Emma's chest. This wasn't just drama. There was real weight there. An edge. The nurse in her, the part of her trained to recognize real pain, kicked in, louder than the old resentment. "Come in," she said, opening the door wider. "We can talk." Michael looked up at her, surprised. For a brief second, a boyish kind of relief flashed in his eyes. He stepped inside slowly, as if he were afraid that any sudden move might make her change her mind. When Emma closed the door behind him, she had no idea she was also closing the quiet chapter of her own solitude. Without realizing it, she was about to open a story that would weave together her past, her present, and a future she wouldn't have dared to dream of that night. The modest living room, lit only by the tired twinkling lights of the old tree, suddenly felt smaller with Michael there. He looked around slowly, taking in the space like someone walking back through a house they'd once called home. His eyes landed on the shelf of framed photos. One of them made him smile with a mix of tenderness and pain, he and Emma as teenagers, dressed simply but neatly, standing in front of the big Christmas tree in the town square, holding plastic cups of soda, hugging. Behind them, a cheap cardboard Santa cutout. "You still have that picture," he said quietly, almost reverently. Emma crossed her arms, a defensive reflex, as if she were bracing herself against everything that memory still carried. "Yeah," she said, trying to sound indifferent. "I don't throw away old photos. They're part of the story. Even when we wish they weren't." Michael swallowed hard, feeling every word land on him like a deserved blow. "The house looks the same," he went on, searching for something neutral. "The tree, the furniture, even that old crochet blanket on the couch." He reached out and touched the faded blanket draped over the back of the sofa. "My mom made that when I was still in high school," Emma explained, more to herself than to him. "I never had the heart to put it away." At the mention of her mother, the air between them thickened. Michael straightened up a little. "I heard about Mrs. Evelyn," he said, voice tight. "Saw a post from someone in town a while back, but I couldn't bring myself to call. I'm really sorry, Emma. I mean it." A flicker of hurt crossed her face. "Being sorry doesn't bring anyone back, Michael." She took a breath. "But, thank you." He nodded, accepting the rebuke without trying to defend himself. To cut the tension, Emma gestured toward the kitchen. "Do you want some coffee? Or something to eat? It's not exactly Christmas dinner, but—" Michael gave a faint, crooked smile. "I'll take whatever you've got. Tonight, anything is a luxury." There was a raw honesty in his voice that caught her attention. It didn't sound like exaggeration. It sounded like a man who had walked out of a dark place. While Emma heated water in the kitchen, Michael stayed in the living room, studying the photos and details, mentally trying to line up the words he needed to say. He hadn't come back just for nostalgia. He was there because everything in his life had collapsed: work, marriage, the way he saw himself. And from the rubble, the only place his mind remembered as truly safe was this house. When she returned, she carried 2 mugs of plain coffee and a small plate of store-bought cookies. She sat across from him. He wrapped his hands around the warm mug as if trying to pull some strength from it. It was a little past 8. Outside, laughter and music floated in from neighboring houses, with the occasional boom of distant fireworks. Inside, the air felt like something between reunion and reckoning. Emma decided not to waste time. "Why are you here, Michael?" she asked, bluntly. "After all these years. Out of nowhere. And on Christmas Eve of all nights." He met her eyes, inhaled slowly, like a man stepping up to the edge of a high ledge. "Because I've lost everything, Emma," he said. "And when you lose everything, you find out what really matters. And, somehow, in a way I don't even fully understand, you still matter to me." Her heart jumped, but she kept her face steady. "That line sounds nice," she replied. "But it doesn't explain anything." Michael nodded, shame in his eyes. "You're right. I owe you more than pretty lines." And then, he began. Michael told her that when he left Pine Valley, he'd gone straight to the city to study architecture, the dream he'd always talked about. At first, everything was brutal, sharing a cramped dorm room, working nights as a waiter, studying until dawn. He admitted, with shame, that somewhere in the chaos of trying to survive, he'd started pulling away from Emma. Not because his feelings had changed, but because he was terrified. "I was scared of trapping you in a life of waiting," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "And I was scared I'd never become the man you deserved. So instead of facing that, I was a coward. I stopped calling. Stopped answering your messages. And after a while, I convinced myself I'd gone too far to ever come back." Emma watched him with a mix of old anger and reluctant understanding. The wounds, though, still ached. He kept going. After graduation, he'd landed a job at a respected architecture firm, worked his ass off, climbed the ladder. Met Rachel, ambitious, elegant, working in the legal department of a major construction company. The relationship moved fast. The marriage even faster. Then came their son, Jacob, now 6 years old. "For a while, I thought I was living the right life," Michael continued. "Good job, nice apartment, the kind of family you see in commercials. But underneath, everything was cold. Nothing felt whole. It was like a beautiful building with rot in the foundation." Rachel had rigid expectations, status, designer vacations, flawless appearances. Michael, used to humble beginnings, constantly felt out of place. The fights multiplied, usually over things that seemed trivial on the surface. "I kept thinking the problem was me," he confessed. "That I was too emotional, too naive, not ambitious enough. So I'd work harder, push myself more. Tried to be the man she wanted. But it was like trying to fill a hole with no bottom." Then, about a year ago, he discovered Rachel was sleeping with a colleague from the office. It didn't come as some explosive confrontation, just a slow accumulation of details, messages, shifts in her mood. When he finally confronted her, she'd seemed almost relieved. "She said I was too emotional, too naive, not driven enough," Michael recalled, with a sad smile. That she needed someone who could match her ambitions in the corporate world. Someone who wasn't, from a small town. They'd filed for divorce. And that's where the real unraveling had started. Rachel, with more financial resources and a better lawyer, had begun arguing that Michael wasn't stable enough to raise Jacob. He worked too much, he was emotionally unstable, he didn't have family nearby for support. "She started using everything against me," he explained. "Even the fact that I came from a small town became ammunition. He's not equipped for city life. He's not sophisticated enough. Like I was some kind of foreigner in my own existence." 3 months ago, the company where Michael worked had hit a crisis. The market collapsed. The firm downsized. Michael lost his job, his benefits, his sense of direction. Without steady income, he couldn't afford the same lawyer. His chances of getting even shared custody were shrinking by the day. 2 weeks ago, I hit rock bottom, Michael said quietly. I was in my apartment, this tiny studio I'd rented after moving out, and I just couldn't see a way forward. I thought about Jacob, about how he'd probably be better off without me. How I was just a failure, a burden. He paused, his voice dropping even lower. I thought about ending it. Emma felt her breath catch. But then, Michael continued, I found an old box of stuff. Photos, letters, things I hadn't looked at in years. And there was this picture of you and me. From that Christmas when we were 17. We were so happy, Emma. So sure the world was ours. He looked up at her, eyes wet. And I realized I'd spent 12 years running from the only place that ever felt like home. From the only person who ever made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. He set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. So I called my lawyer. I told him I was going back to Pine Valley. That I was going to try to rebuild something, anything, that could prove to a judge that I'm not a complete disaster. That I'm capable of being a father. Michael leaned forward slightly. And the first person I thought of, the only person I could think of, was you. After agreeing to let him stay a few days, Emma led Michael down the narrow hallway to the guest room. It was her mother's old room. The door creaked slightly as she opened it, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. The room was simple, a queen bed with a floral quilt, a small nightstand with an old lamp, and a bookshelf in the corner with worn paperbacks. Emma turned on the lamp. The warm yellow light created an almost dreamlike atmosphere. It's still the same, she said, adjusting the pillows. My mom used to read here at night. She said books were the cheapest way to travel. Michael ran his hand along the edge of the bed with respect, as if touching something sacred. She always had a way of making simple things special, Michael said, with a melancholy smile. Emma nodded, feeling a tightness in her chest. If you need extra blankets, there's some in the closet, she pointed. The town doesn't get too cold, but the wind from the hills picks up at night. It's perfect, Emma. He breathed deeply. I swear, as soon as I get my head straight, I'll figure out how to repay you. I don't want to be a burden. She held his gaze for a moment. You're not a burden, she said. Her voice came out softer than she'd intended. At least, not yet, she added, trying to lighten the mood with a small joke. Michael gave a brief laugh, and in that laugh was a trace of the boy she'd known back then. They said goodnight with an awkward formality, like strangers sharing the same space. Emma went back to the living room, turned off the main lights, leaving only the Christmas tree's tired glow. She sat on the couch and hugged a pillow. The echo of Michael's footsteps still seemed to vibrate through the hallway. She thought about everything she'd heard, the failed marriage, the distant son, the bankruptcy, the feeling of having no ground beneath your feet. As different as their stories were, there was something in common, both of them had been left on the margins of life. Not at the peak, not in total defeat, just adrift. She remembered the last time she'd heard about Michael, years ago. Someone in town had mentioned he was doing really well in the city, with a beautiful wife, a good job, and a son. For a while, that had eaten at her, the feeling of being discarded and replaced by a shinier life. Now, though, she saw before her not a successful man, but someone exhausted, stripped of his defenses. And that moved her in ways she couldn't quite name. That night, she took a long time falling asleep. The soft sound of wind against the windows mixed with her confused thoughts. At some point, she imagined that somewhere in town, her mother was watching. And maybe, just maybe, smiling. Emma woke to the smell of fresh bread. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. But the aroma was real, warm, buttery, unmistakably homemade. She got out of bed, pulled on an old sweater, and made her way to the kitchen. There was Michael, barefoot, wearing one of her mother's old aprons. His hair was wet, he'd showered, and he was concentrating intensely on pouring coffee into 2 ceramic mugs. On the counter sat a basket of fresh bread, a plate with cut fruit, cheese, ham, and he was just finishing arranging everything with almost religious care. On the old kitchen radio, a soft instrumental Christmas carol was playing. When Michael noticed her, he smiled, genuine, vulnerable, full of hope. "Good morning," he said, a little nervous. "I hope I wasn't too bold. I found everything in the kitchen and I thought I could make something to thank you." Emma didn't know what to say. It had been years since anyone had made her breakfast. Years since anyone had cared about those small gestures. "Michael," she started. "I know it's not much," he continued quickly. "But it's what I could do. My grandmother taught me to bake bread when I was a kid, and, well, I thought maybe I'd remember how." She approached the table slowly. The bread was perfect, golden, with that aroma only fresh-baked bread has. The fruit was cut with care. Everything was arranged with simple elegance. "It's perfect," she said, and her voice cracked a little. "Michael, it's so perfect." He looked down, shy. "Let's have breakfast together," he suggested. "Like the old days. When everything was simpler." They sat at the small kitchen table, and for an hour, they ate, talked about trivial things, how the town had changed, people they used to know, and for a moment, it was as if the years of distance simply didn't exist. But when they finished, reality returned. Michael cleaned the table while Emma watched from the couch. There was something in the way he moved, careful, attentive, as if he wanted to prove he could be responsible, that he could be trusted. When he finished, he sat beside her. "Emma," he began carefully, "I need to talk to you about something important." Her heart began to race. "What?" "My lawyer," Rodrigo said, taking a breath. "He says I have a hearing in 3 weeks. To decide on custody of Jacob. And I need to prove I have a stable life here. That I have work, a place to live, that I am capable of taking care of my son." Emma listened, processing. "And," she asked. "And I don't have any of that," he admitted. "I don't have a job, I don't have money, I don't even have a legal place to live. I'm completely lost." He ran his hands over his face. "I didn't come here expecting you to solve my problems, Emma. But, is there anything I can do? Any work in town? Anyone you know who might need an architect, even as a consultant?" Emma thought for a moment. "There's a local businessman, Mr. Harrison," she said slowly. "He has a construction and renovation business. He's friends with my brother Diego. Maybe I could talk to him." Hope flashed in Michael's eyes. "Really?" "Yes," she answered. "But Michael." She looked at him seriously. "This isn't charity. You have to prove you're capable. That you can work, that you're responsible. Do you understand?" "I understand," he nodded. "And I will. I promise you." 3 days after Christmas, Emma and Michael showed up at the office of Mr. Robert Harrison, a businessman in his mid-50s who'd expanded his construction and renovation company considerably over the past decade. The office was simple but functional, walls covered with blueprints, desks piled with paperwork, the smell of coffee and construction dust. Mr. Harrison was reviewing some documents when they walked in. "Emma, my dear," he greeted her, standing up to embrace her. "How are you? It's been too long." "I'm good, Mr. Harrison," she replied, returning the hug. "I came because I wanted you to meet someone." She introduced Michael, explaining briefly that he was an architect looking for work in town. Mr. Harrison studied Michael with narrowed eyes, the kind of evaluating gaze that businessmen develop over years. "An architect?" he asked, skeptical. "In Pine Valley? We don't exactly build skyscrapers around here, son." "I know," Michael replied calmly. "But I also know that a good renovation, a solid design, can transform a house. And that's what makes the difference in a town like this." Mr. Harrison smiled slightly. "You've got a quick answer. I like that." He leaned back in his chair. "Look, I've got several projects going. House renovations, expansions, that sort of thing. The problem is my local contractors don't always have the vision to do more than just the basics. If you could help me design better, optimize spaces, maybe there's something." Michael felt his heart accelerate. "I can show you my portfolio," he offered, pulling out his phone. For the next 20 minutes, Michael showed projects he'd done in the city, elegant renovations, innovative designs, creative solutions for tight spaces. Mr. Harrison studied each image with growing interest. When he finished, Mr. Harrison leaned back again. "All right. I'm going to give you a shot," he said. 3-month contract as a project consultant. You'll work with me on the renovations, do the designs, coordinate with the contractors. The pay isn't huge, but it's legit, with proper paperwork. You interested?" Michael felt his legs go weak. "Yes," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, of course I'm interested. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I won't let you down." "I hope not," the businessman replied, extending his hand. When they left the office, Michael seemed to be floating. Emma watched him with a genuine smile. "You did it," she said. "See? You still have what it takes." Michael looked at her, and in his eyes was a gratitude so deep it was almost painful. "I wouldn't have made it without you," he replied. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Over the next 3 weeks, Michael threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised even Mr. Harrison. He redesigned 3 house renovations, coordinated with contractors, solved problems with creativity and precision. The businessman began to see that he'd made the right call. More importantly, Michael began to feel like himself again. Not the broken man who'd arrived at Emma's door on Christmas Eve, but someone with purpose. Someone building something. And through it all, Emma was there. She'd help him review designs in the evenings. They'd sit at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold, as he sketched ideas and she offered perspective. Sometimes they'd laugh at his rough sketches. Sometimes they'd sit in comfortable silence, just being near each other. One night, about a week before the hearing, Michael was working on a particularly complex renovation when he suddenly stopped. "Emma," he said quietly. "I need to tell you something." She looked up from her book. "What?" "I'm terrified," he admitted. "About the hearing. About whether any of this will be enough. About whether I can actually be the father Jacob deserves." Emma set down her book and moved closer to him. "You're already being that father," she said softly. "Every day you're here, every choice you make to stay and fight instead of run away, that's what being a good father looks like." Michael looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched her face, just the tips of his fingers tracing her cheekbone. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "Any of it. You, this chance, this." "Stop," Emma interrupted gently. "Stop keeping score of what you deserve. Just, be here. Be present. That's enough. He moved closer, and for a moment it seemed like everything would converge into a kiss. A kiss that would seal years of distance, of hurt, of unspoken longing. But Michael stopped just inches from her lips. I can't, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not like this. Not while I'm still broken. Not while I have all of this hanging over me. Emma opened her eyes, confused. What do you mean? Michael pulled his hand back slowly, as if it cost him everything to do so. If I kiss you now, he explained, it would be because I'm desperate. Because you're the only solid thing I have. And that's not fair to you. You deserve someone who chooses you because he loves you, not because he needs you to survive. There was a maturity in those words that Emma hadn't expected. An honesty that hurt. She looked away. So what are you saying? Michael touched her face again, this time just with his fingertips, tracing her jawline. I'm saying I feel all of this for you, he confessed. That I woke up this morning thinking about you. That every gesture you make reminds me why I was an idiot to leave this town. But I need to fix my life first. My son. My mistakes. I need to be a whole man again before I can offer anything real to you. Tears returned to Emma's eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. Are you asking me to wait? She asked, with a mix of hope and fear. No, Michael answered firmly. I'm asking you not to wait. I'm asking you to live. To go out, meet people, let yourself be happy. And if, after all this is over, if we're still here, still looking at each other like this. He smiled sadly, then maybe we'll have a real chance. Emma felt something break and rebuild inside her simultaneously. You're right, she said, her voice thick. But that doesn't mean I don't feel all of this. I know, replied Michael. And that's exactly why I need to do things right this time. They embraced that night. Not a romantic embrace, but something deeper, two broken people finding peace in each other's presence. The next morning, Emma woke with a decision already formed in her mind. She'd been thinking about it for days, turning it over, examining it from every angle. And now, sitting in the quiet of dawn, she knew what she had to do. She went to the bank. The manager, Mr. Peterson, greeted her with the careful politeness reserved for people about to make major financial decisions. Good morning, Miss Clark, he said. What can I help you with today? I want to withdraw a significant portion of my mother's inheritance, Emma said directly. Not all of it, but enough to help someone. I need to know the process and any tax implications. Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly. That's quite a bit of money, Miss Clark. May I ask what this is for? Emma hesitated for only a moment. It's for someone who needs a second chance, she said. Someone who's trying to rebuild his life and be a better father to his son. The manager studied her carefully, then nodded. I see. Well, we can certainly arrange that. The funds are yours. There will be some tax considerations, but nothing that should prevent you from doing this. By mid-afternoon, Emma had the paperwork in order. The money, not a fortune, but enough to make a real difference, was ready to transfer. That evening, she told Michael. They were sitting in the living room, the weak Christmas tree light still blinking softly, when she said it. I'm going to help you, she announced. With the custody hearing. With everything. Michael's face went pale. Emma, no. I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, she interrupted. I'm offering. My mother left me money. Not a huge amount, but enough. I'm going to give it to your lawyer. For the hearing, for establishing residency, for whatever you need. I can't take your mother's money, Michael said, standing up, shaking his head. That's not right. Emma stood too, facing him directly. My mother spent her whole life helping people, Emma said firmly. She was a teacher. She believed in second chances. She believed in redemption. And if she were here, she'd want this money to go to someone who's genuinely trying to change, to be better. But. There's no but, Emma cut him off. Michael, I've spent 2 years in this house, alone, wondering if anything I did mattered. If my life meant anything. And then you showed up, and suddenly I have a reason to believe in something again. I have a reason to take a risk. She took a step closer to him. You asked me earlier why I'm so strong. The truth is, I'm not. I'm just someone who learned not to give up. And right now, I'm choosing not to give up on you. On your son. On the possibility that sometimes, when you open a door to someone, it changes both your lives. Michael's eyes filled with tears. If I accept this, he said slowly, I'm accepting that I owe you everything. That I'm indebted to you for the rest of my life. No, Emma said gently but firmly. You're not. You're accepting that someone believes in you. That's different. That's a gift, not a debt. She walked to the Christmas tree and placed her hand on the small porcelain angel with the broken, glued back together wing. My mother used to say that angels sometimes show up in the small choices we make. Not in big miracles. Maybe this Christmas is the first time in years that I'm choosing to think about something beyond just surviving. Maybe I'm choosing to think about meaning. Michael also stood and walked to her, stopping a few steps away, respecting the distance but making it clear he was present. I don't deserve this, Emma, he whispered. But I'm going to accept it. Not for me. For my son. She breathed deeply, dried her eyes discreetly, and turned to face him. Then tomorrow I go to the bank, she said, practical. I talk to the manager, figure out how to withdraw the money. We transfer it to your lawyer and start thinking about the rest, proof of residence, some kind of job prospect, any documents that might help you. Michael searched for words, but they escaped him. I don't even know where to start thanking you. Don't start, she interrupted, gentle but firm. Just, don't waste it. The two looked at each other for several seconds, and an invisible thread seemed to stretch between them. It wasn't yet a thread of romance, nor just of friendship. It was something more complex, a silent alliance, born of two solitudes that decided, that Christmas, to face the world together. The courthouse in Pine Valley was an old building with colonial architecture that seemed oddly out of place with its modern function. White walls, cold hallways. There was an industrial cleaning smell that couldn't mask the tension hanging in the air. Michael and Emma arrived early. The lawyer, Dr. Stephen Walsh, was already waiting with a thick folder of documents. Everything's ready, he said, professional. You two did good work. The documents are in order. Now it's just a matter of presentation and hope. Rachel arrived 30 minutes later, accompanied by an even more experienced lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with a cold expression. She herself looked like a painting, flawless makeup, designer clothes, perfectly styled hair. But there was something hard in her eyes that Emma recognized immediately as calculated coldness. When Rachel saw Michael, her face didn't change. She simply ignored him completely, as if he were air. Michael felt his heart race. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning. While they waited, Emma stayed close to Michael, holding his hand discreetly. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was a gesture of solidarity, of you're not alone. When they were called into the courtroom, Michael took a deep breath. You've got this, Emma whispered. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, with a serious but not unkind expression. Her name was Judge Mariana Reeves. The process began with Rachel's lawyer presenting her case. Michael was irresponsible, had abandoned the state, had no stable income, was emotionally unstable, and therefore represented a risk to the child's well-being. Each word was a knife wound. Then it was Dr. Walsh's turn. He presented the documents: the work contract with Mr. Harrison, proof of residence, records showing Michael had maintained regular contact with his son, messages of love between father and child. But the crucial moment came when Judge Reeves asked Michael to speak. Michael stood, trembling slightly. "Your Honor," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm not going to pretend I was a perfect husband. I wasn't. I failed at keeping my marriage together. And I accept that failure." He took a deep breath. "But I never failed as a father." His voice grew stronger. "I woke up in the middle of the night when my son had a fever. I taught him to draw, to laugh, to dream. I drove him to school, went to every parent-teacher conference, celebrated every small achievement like it was the most important thing in the world. Because it was. Because it is." Tears began to fall. "I came here because I was broken," he continued. "Because I lost my job, because my marriage fell apart, because I was in a place so dark I couldn't see a way out. But I didn't come here to run away from my son. I came here to try to rebuild myself. To be a better father. A better man." He looked directly at the judge. "My son asked me yesterday if I love him. And I told him I love him more than anything in this world. And that's the truth. If you give me a chance, I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that." There was absolute silence in the courtroom. Even Rachel looked uncomfortable. Then the judge asked to speak with Jacob. The child was brought into the room, a 6-year-old boy with his father's brown eyes, a little scared by the formal setting. "Jacob," the judge said, her voice gentle, "do you love your father?" The boy nodded vigorously. "Does he hurt you?" Jacob shook his head, confused by the question. "Would you like to spend more time with him?" The boy looked at Michael, and his entire face lit up. "Yes. Daddy draws with me and makes me laugh." In that moment, something shifted in the judge's expression. After deliberating for only 20 minutes, Judge Reeves returned. Considering the documents presented, proof of residence and income for Mr. Michael, and most importantly considering the child's testimony and the clear demonstration of paternal affection, this court decides for shared custody with primary residence with the mother, but with expanded visitation rights. The judge read from the document. "Mr. Michael will have the right to full weekends, half of school vacations, and daily contact with the child." She raised her eyes. "Additionally, this court recommends that both parents seek family mediation to establish a more cooperative relationship for the child's well-being." Michael felt his legs weaken. He hadn't gotten full custody, but he'd gotten far more than he dared to hope for. Jacob ran into his arms, and Michael lifted him, spinning him in the air while crying openly. "Daddy!" Jacob shouted, laughing. "Daddy! Daddy!" Emma, watching from a distance, felt her own tears fall. She'd made the right choice. The money, the inheritance, it all had purpose. When Michael came down with Jacob, he handed the boy to Rachel, who would take him back to the city, and walked straight to Emma. Without saying anything, he embraced her with such force it felt like he was trying to absorb all the gratitude, all the joy, all the second chance she'd given him. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for believing in me." When they returned to Pine Valley, the town looked different. Or maybe it was just the way Michael and Emma saw it now. They stopped on the way to buy flowers, red flowers that Emma placed on the Christmas tree as a symbol of victory. When they got to the house, Daniel was there, waiting. He'd heard about the hearing result through town gossip. News traveled fast in Pine Valley. "Congratulations," he said to Michael, extending his hand. "You deserved it." Michael shook his hand, genuinely grateful for the acceptance. That night, the three of them had dinner together. Emma prepared simple food, but made with love. Daniel brought wine. Michael brought stories about Jacob, about his plans for the boy, about how he'd rebuild his life. And for the first time in a long time, that house didn't feel like a museum of absence. It felt like a home. A week later, on December 31st, Michael received a call. It was Jacob. "Daddy," the boy shouted, excited. "Mommy said you're picking me up tomorrow. You're going to stay with me for the whole new year." Michael looked at Emma, who was in the kitchen, and smiled with a joy she'd never seen in him before. "I sure am, buddy," he answered. "And I'm bringing a surprise for you." When he hung up, he turned to Emma. "He's going to stay here," he said. "At least for a week." Rachel agreed. Emma felt her heart skip. "Here? In the house?" "If you'll let me," Michael replied, with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "I'd like him to know Pine Valley. To know you. To understand where his father comes from." Emma nodded, unable to speak. The next day, when Michael brought Jacob back by hand, the entire house transformed. Jacob was an explosion of energy, running from room to room, asking about everything, laughing at everything. He had his father's eyes, but his mother's easy smile. When he saw the Christmas tree, he stopped. "Daddy," he exclaimed. "There's an angel." He was pointing at the small porcelain angel with the broken, carefully glued back together wing. Michael knelt down beside his son. "There is," he answered. "That angel is very special. It's been protecting this house for a long time." "It's broken," Jacob observed, with a child's logic. "It is," Michael confirmed. "But you know what? Sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones that are broken. Because they learn how to be strong." Emma, watching from a distance, felt something complete inside her. On New Year's Eve, the house was full. Daniel had brought some friends. Mr. Harrison, the businessman who'd hired Michael, showed up with his family. Even Dr. Walsh, the lawyer, stopped by to check on things, but really, he wanted to be part of this miracle. The table was abundant. Fresh baked bread made by Michael, chocolate cake, fruit, soda, even a carefully selected red wine that Daniel had chosen. Jacob ran through the house, playing, laughing, filling every corner with life. When the clock began to count down to midnight, everyone gathered in the living room around the Christmas tree. Michael held Jacob in his arms. Emma stood beside him. Daniel stood beside Emma. 10, someone started the countdown. 9, everyone continued. 8. 7. 6. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. When the clock struck midnight, fireworks exploded in the sky over Pine Valley. Hugs were exchanged. Tears, of joy this time, fell. Michael set Jacob down, and the boy ran to embrace Emma, as if he'd known her his whole life. "Are you Aunt Emma?" Jacob asked. Emma looked at Michael, who smiled. "I am," she answered, hugging the boy. In that moment, when Jacob was hugging her and Michael watched with an expression of peace she'd never seen in him, Emma understood something profound. Christmas wasn't about being alone or being with others. It wasn't about having the perfect family or expensive gifts. It was about choosing to believe that things can change. It was about opening the door when someone knocks. It was about risking everything for love. The camera pulls back slowly from the house in Pine Valley, showing the town in its June splendor, without Christmas lights, but with its own beauty. Inside the house, Michael is in his new office, a small room that Emma helped him set up. He works on renovation projects for Mr. Harrison and other clients in town. Modest earnings, but stable. Honest. In the kitchen, Emma prepares breakfast. She got a job at a private clinic in town, not the hospital, but work that satisfies her, keeps her busy, makes her feel useful. Jacob is in the living room, drawing. He draws colorful houses, exactly like his father used to draw as a boy. Daniel appears at the door, bringing a cake he made. "Are you guys ready?" he asks. Everyone gathers. They pick up the suitcase that's been packed since the night before. They're spending the weekend at the beach, the first trip the four of them take together. It's not a fancy destination, but it's a destination chosen with love. As they leave the house, Michael stops for a second and looks back at the Christmas tree that, even out of season, still hangs in the living room, a permanent symbol of that Christmas that changed everything. He touches the small porcelain angel with the broken, glued back together wing. "Thank you," he whispers, to Emma's mother, to the universe, to God, to whatever is responsible for miracles. Emma, watching from a distance, smiles. She knows exactly what he's doing. Jacob pulls Michael's hand. "Daddy. Let's go." And they leave, the four of them, toward the life that finally started to make sense. The camera shows the town of Pine Valley at dusk. Lights begin to turn on in the houses. Families gather. Life goes on. And somewhere in that town, a voice, Emma's voice, mature, serene, but still thick with emotion, narrates. They say Christmas is the time for miracles. That it's when doors open and magic happens. I spent years not believing that. I spent years thinking miracles were things that happened to other people, in other cities, in other lives. But then, on a cold night in December, someone knocked on my door. And I discovered that miracles aren't distant cosmic events. Miracles are the small choices we make. They're the hugs we give when we could turn away. They're the risks we take when we could stay safe. Miracles are doors that open. And if you're listening to this, alone somewhere, scared, hurting, hopeful, know that your door can open too. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But if you believe, if you dare, if you choose hope, someone can knock. The camera slowly zooms toward the lit house, where the silhouettes of Michael, Emma, Jacob, and Daniel can be seen through the window, embraced, laughing. New Year's fireworks explode in the sky. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, it really helps keep this project going. And tell me in the comments, which part of this story moved you the most? Was it the reunion on Christmas Eve, the moment in the courthouse, or the second chance they found together? I love reading what you felt. See you in the next story.